What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with DCeased, and I am coming down with a cold, so I may not necessarily be as crazy and animated as I normally am, but as is the case with a Tom Taylor comic, the ending of this is crazy. That's always the case with Tom Taylor. So what we end up doing here is we pick up with Superman. There is a bit of a prelude when it comes to Lobo, but we'll talk about him presumably in the next issue when he makes his appearance as part of the main conflict. But what goes on here is it initially picks up with Superman. And this basically deals with the destruction of Balavax Vic. Right now, if you guys remember the last video that we did, and as always, you'll find the DCeased playlist down in the description so that if you're just joining us, you can get caught up on everything. But as we talked about in the last video, this was destroyed by Mr. Mxyzptlk, who is one of the most powerful beings to ever exist in the history of DC Comics. And the fact that this guy has now been turned to the army of the dead, right? Like the army of Darkseid, right? The undead army. It changes everything because Mr. Mxyzptlk, this guy can alter reality just with a snap of his fingers. This guy can go toe-to-toe with the most powerful beings that exist out there in DC. And so this is kind of a worst case scenario. We don't know the full totality of his abilities, and we don't even know if he can access his true power anymore. But the important thing here is that with Mr. Mxyzptlk becoming part of the undead army, he destroys the planet of Balavax Vic. Now, there are a couple reasons why the superheroes even responded to this world in the first place when the undead army was heading there. There's really only two main reasons. The first is because of Kilowog, who's a member of the Green Lantern Corps, and the fact that it's his own home planet. And it's more or less the Green Lantern saying, we will ally with you because you're one of us, and we'll do everything we can to protect your home world. The other part of this was just self-preservation. Balavax Vic is home to 16 billion people, with a B. You're talking about an army so vast that it bolsters the existing vastness of Darkseid's army and makes conquering the universe all the easier. And so for everybody who really wasn't a Green Lantern and didn't really even know Kilowog on a personal level, it really required their intervention, because had they not stepped in, presumably 16 billion foes, or 16 billion people or so, would have bolstered the army of Darkseid. Such as it was, they're all dead, right? So I guess it's kind of a zero sum now if you're a person who lacks empathy. Like, hey, dead man can't fight a war. So that's basically what this is now. But at the end of the day, there is a bit of somberness that comes in the aftermath of this, and the destruction of this entire world hits Superman hard, because for the second time over the course of DCeased, and even the second time in his life in this alternate reality story, he has to basically watch a world fall. The first time it happened was when the outbreak happened on Earth, right? When like everybody on Earth was either becoming infected or they were killed, or they managed to escape, they managed to flee. But like that was it, right? Humanity, just regular people, there was no real hope for them. There was no real saving them. And so Superman did what he could where he could, but even he fell to the power of the undead, of the anti-life virus. And so when that happened, of course, ultimately he was saved, hence the reason why he's here now. But this is the second time he has to watch that happen. Now, one of the funny things about this is that it's easy to look at Tom Taylor's writing and see him as a guy who's really just kind of writing off Superman as like incompetent, right? Or a guy who just can't really do anything effective in this universe because he sucks. But that's not really the case. The truth about it is you kind of have to look at the actions of Superman both in a micro and in a macro sense. When it comes to like Superman operating in a micro sense, he's in Metropolis, and sometimes there's foes around the world that he faces off against, and that's it. But when it comes to Superman operating on a macro level, right, on a great big huge larger level, especially in a universal space, he can't be everywhere at once, and he can't save everybody all at once. Despite Superman almost appearing as this kind of larger than life figure, he's not. He's just a person who's got some powers, and he's really capable, and he does cool stuff sometimes, and that's it. And so it's one of those really cool ways to kind of bring his character down and remind us as the reader, this guy's not some unstoppable force. And watching a world perish when he feels like he could have done something to save them, it hits him all the harder. Not only that, you've also got Kyle Raynor who's struggling here, right? Now remember, Kyle Raynor is one of the 4 Green Lanterns of Earth. You've got Kyle Raynor, Guy Gardner, Hal Jordan, and John Stewart. John Stewart and Kilowog are dead, right? They're out. So literally, like, Kyle Raynor is watching the people that he calls friends perish right in front of his eyes. And so it's really just one of these instances where this destruction of this world happened at such a time to where it strikes a massive moral blow at the superhero community. But here's the beauty of Superman, right? Superman is pissed. This guy is incensed. And in fact, despite the fact that they're seemingly so far away from each other, both he and Darkseid lock eyes on each other. And for a moment, Superman is ready to race off and face off against Darkseid directly. But if he did that, he would fail. there'd be no way for him to come out on top of that fight. Assuming that it's just him and Darkseid, it's literally Darkseid empowered by a yellow lantern ring. He's a member of the Sinestro Corps. That doubles the amount of power that he normally has. He would absolutely crush Superman. Now, when you add in the fact that members of the Undead Army include Supergirl, Kara Zor-El, who's more powerful than Superman is, and all these other different individuals out there, all of whom have different varying levels of power, sometimes comparable to Superman, sometimes a little less powerful. In the case of Mr. Mxyzptlk, even more powerful. No way this guy would win. It would literally be a fool's errand. It's a suicide run. And so he does the next best thing. He literally takes all that anger, he channels it inward, he tells Kyle, it's not lost. We can still do something. He turns it into hope. And that's the power of Superman. The power of Superman is that all the anger and the rage that we as people would normally feel, and we would spew that anger and rage out into the world on Twitter or Reddit or something like that, and do nothing to make the world better, Superman does the opposite. Superman's response is like, yes, I'm full of anger and I'm full of grief and I'm full of sadness, but I'm going to channel that into something productive, right? I'm going to do something good with it. And then he goes out and does that. And so again, it's one of the small differences and really kind of the hallmark of what makes Superman, Superman. And so following that, we switch over to Mr. Mxyzptlk and the Specter. Now this is a fight for the ages, right? This is a massive battle. A really good example of this, if you're familiar with Marvel Comics, it would be like Protege versus the Living Tribunal, right? Protege has the power to copy the powers of anyone he sees, and there's no limit to the level of power that he can copy. So much so that he became as powerful as the Living Tribunal. It's like these two guys facing off against each other. You can only imagine the level of power that's being displayed here. Like quite literally, they're creating black holes, they're tearing at the very fabric of space. The impact of their punches is enough to shatter the planets around them, right? Like suns are going supernova. It's crazy how intense this battle is. Now, the Green Lanterns, try as they might, fire off their Green Lantern rings. They try to restrain Mr. Mxyzptlk. He kills every last one of them. And by all standards of measurement, this is a losing battle, right? It is a losing fight. The average person cannot possibly stand a chance to even hold their own in a battle between these two titans. So it really just comes down to Mr. Mxyzptlk and the Specter to see who ends up winning. But here's where everything goes south. Yet again, yes, you guys know how it is with Tom Taylor. Just when you think the heroes have a chance to win, things go belly up yet again. So Brainiac basically arrives here. Now, of course, Brainiac has historically been a Superman villain, but in this instance, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The desire for self-preservation makes every survivor across the universe, whether they were former enemies or not, they're all allies now. They're all working together just to try to keep themselves alive and destroy the undead army. So Brainiac showing up here is, well, one, they've already met with him before, but two, him showing up here and arriving on Earth 2, which is kind of like the backup Earth, the second Earth after the first Earth fell, that it is a way for them to kind of marshal and bolster their forces. The problem with this is that the arrival of Brainiac is met with the arrival of Scott Free, right? Mr. Miracle, the guy who can break out of any prison anywhere. The issue with this is that he is traveling with a mother box, and as soon as Brainiac sees this, he's like, why did you bring that here? Because the mother boxes are all connected. He literally tells him it's a giant network. What you're doing here is ringing the dinner bell. You're telling everyone that we're here. It's like literally, as soon as the mother box pings and the infected realize where they are, a boom tube opens and they all come pouring out, led by Highfather, right? The leader of the New Gods, one of the most powerful beings out there in DC, and yet another guy whose power, depending on the story, rivals or sometimes even exceeds that of Superman's. So now you have all these New Gods who are just pouring out onto Earth 2, and they're attacking all the superheroes, right? Like, it seems like it's all going belly up. You've got their forces who are showing up on the scene. It's open season, right? It's a slaughterhouse. Humanity, like, you have like Batman and you have a few other people trying to get people out where they can, when they can, but one of the people that falls here is Leslie Tompkins. Now, I told you guys what was likely going to happen here, and Alfred does not become a Green Lantern, but I told you guys something was going to happen with Alfred, that Alfred was going to, in some capacity, be the main focus of the story, or just something nuts would take place with him. And so what ends up happening here is, remember, Alfred and Leslie Tompkins, they have a relationship together. They're in love, right? Like, it's like for the first time in a long time, Leslie represents the possibility for Alfred being able to have a happier life. After having to kill Batman when he became infected, having to kill kill Nightwing and what was it, Tim Drake, having to kill him, when they all became infected, having to basically kill his sons, it tore him apart. But when Damian Wayne survived and became the new Batman, and Leslie Tompkins fell in love with Alfred and Alfred fell in love with her, it was a shot at happiness. And now that shot's been ripped away. Now it's been pulled away from Alfred. So literally what ends up happening here is we transition back over to the fight between Mxyzptlk and the Specter. And so literally what ends up going on here is Superman realizing all the Specter needs is an opening. That's all the Specter needs, is the ability to just get a shot in that can destroy Mxyzptlk. Superman hits Mr. Mxyzptlk head on. Not enough to destroy him, but it's enough to distract him. And with that opening, the Specter stabs Mr. M through the heart, right? Mr. Mxyzptlk, he stabs him through the heart, but Mxyzptlk in turn reaches into the heart of the Specter and rips out Jim Corgan. Now, Jim Corgan is the host, because remember, when it comes to the Specter, he's just the embodiment of God's vengeance or God's wrath, depending on what comic and what reality the comic is taking place in. But the important thing here is, if the Specter is not bonded to a host, he just kind of floats out there into the ether, and that's basically it. The Specter has to have somebody to be attached to in order to be able to act and in order to be able to do anything. There have been stories in DC Comics where the Specter is able to act without a host, but that's not the norm. And Tom Taylor's kind of following the traditional standard of DC, which is the Specter needs a host to do something. And so as Jim Corgan literally lay dying just out there in space, that the Specter having no host whatsoever, Alfred has to watch on as Leslie Tompkins dies. And then in turn, you basically have Highfather who steps in, and Highfather shows up on the scene. Damian Wayne jumps in to do what he can where he can as Batman, but he's no match for Highfather. All they're really doing is buying time here. The reality is that Highfather will kill them all. He will eradicate every single person here. They're all going to die. And in fact, when Highfather hits Damian Wayne, Alfred steps in and just lets out this unrelenting scream. Now, here's the thing, right? This whole thing's told from the perspective of Alfred. He says, I didn't even realize I'd moved. All I knew was there was a scream I contained when that little boy lost his parents in an alley so long ago. A scream I held in as I ended the lives of 3 men I loved. A scream of defiance, of grief, but mostly of fury. And in that moment, I heard an echo of my anger across the cosmos. There was a harmony of rage, and Alfred becomes the new host for the Specter. Literally, Alfred becomes Specter, and it is dope, because as soon as that happens, the first thing Alfred does, he kills Highfather on the spot. And if Alfred can kill Highfather, Alfred can kill Darkseid, and Alfred could quite literally turn the tide of the war. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Cliffhangers, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.